Are you one of the everyone that have heard of the training philosophy of no pain, no gain? It's supposedly the best way to get results, and that means pushing yourself all the way to the brink of failure. Well, in this video, we're going to once and for all clear the air and give you all the information you need about training to failure, whether it's worth doing, and if so, when should we actually do it? First, what the heck is training to failure? Well, it's exactly how it sounds, and that's pushing your exercises to the point that you cannot physically perform another rep successfully. Now, there is a more scientific term known as concentric failure, where you fail to complete the concentric muscle shortening phase of a rep without significant compromises to your form and technique. Essentially, if you are trying to eke out the final rep of a bicep curl but can't do it without leaning all the way back like you're in the world's worst limbo competition, then congrats, you have reached failure in more ways than one. But let's clear the air immediately. Is training to failure actually worth your time and effort? Based on the current data we have, the answer is no, probably not. The science is quite consistent in showing that training to failure provides little to no additional gains in both muscle and strength. In fact, some researchers have argued that training to failure is more likely to work against you when considering its effect on recovery. Training to failure is highly fatiguing, which demands more recovery both in the short term, like between sets, and even long term, like between sessions. Data has shown, as opposed to the usual 48 hours, it can take up to 72 hours for your performance to fully recover from a failure-heavy workout. And ultimately, this reduction in performance, thus overall work, defeats the whole purpose of training to failure, where instead of constantly pushing yourself to the max, you just end up constantly pushing your next gym session to the next day. So overall, it seems like training to failure is, to put it lightly, stupid. So how in the world will it ever be a good idea to do it? The good thing is that people have been smartening up in recent years and gradually train less and less to failure. However, it can also be a problem if you go too far in the other direction and do far less work than you would with failure. The thing is, training to failure per se is unnecessary, but the science is very clear that it is necessary to at least train close to failure, stopping about 1 to 3 reps shy of it if you want the best results. But the only way we know how to train close to failure is if we know what training to failure feels like in the first place, which I'd wager that a lot of people simply do not. Just go to your local commercial gym if you don't believe me. Also, if you think this problem is only due to a lack of experience, I wouldn't be so sure. A 2016 study showed that subjects with multiple years of training experience who believed they were pushing to their max end up making less gains than subjects that were directly instructed to push to concentric failure. In other words, even experienced lifters can get it wrong sometimes. This specific issue of identifying failure is, in my opinion, a good enough reason all on its own for pretty much everyone to, at the very least, train to failure on occasion. With that in mind, let's talk about when is a good time to train to failure. Again, training close to failure is the goal, which means the sooner you can experience training to failure, the better. That goes for everyone, even beginners, but not before developing good form and technique, of course. So if you currently haven't trained much to failure, then now is probably a good time to start. And make sure you are indeed training to concentric failure. Get a spotter if needed, and even ask someone you find more knowledgeable to give you feedback. It also might still be a good idea to continue training to failure even after becoming accustomed to it, because again, sometimes we might not be training as close to failure as we think we are. So to cover any unexpected gaps, it makes sense to train to failure on occasion, and it might be the thing that finally pushes you out of a plateau. A popular strategy is to train to failure only on the final sets of your exercises, usually called an AMRAP, or performing as many reps as possible in your final set. Now granted, recent data showed that training to failure exclusively in the final set also seems unnecessary, but again, that's in the context of reaching true failure, which again, a lot of people struggle to do. Outside of this main reason, training to failure can also be useful during an overreaching phase. If you don't know what that is, then you probably don't have to worry about it, but I do have a video covering it that you can check out in the description if you want to learn more. And of course, we cannot ignore safety. From an injury perspective, even though it might seem obvious that it will be more dangerous, the science is quite ambiguous about the injury risks posed with training to failure. But if you want to exercise that extra caution, it might be best to reduce or completely avoid training to failure on multi-joint compound movements like the deadlift, where pretty much everyone's form gives out when things get rough, especially with heavier weights. Probably best not to put yourself in such a precarious position if you can avoid it. For single joint isolation exercises, however, like bicep curls, training to failure can be used quite often and more freely. And finally, and again, let's keep in mind recovery. It is much more physically taxing to train to failure frequently, so if you find yourself doing significantly less and less reps after each set, then just cut the failure out. It's not worth it. Same thing for session to session. If performance significantly goes down, then training to failure needs to go out. Simply put, be smart about your training. Training to failure can be a powerful tool, but as Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great fatigue. So Peter Parker, make sure you subscribe to Picturefit. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a smarty thumbs up and share it with your failure-loving friends. Subscribe for more just like Spider-Man would. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to get your protein. Just don't get your protein to failure, whatever that means.